You need to say to him exactly what I told you to say.
Why don't you just say it?
If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Claypool, I think I had better arrange to see Las Paris immediately.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I go and tell Miss Castle.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I really must be going.
Wait.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to the little boy's room.
Well, if you'll excuse me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've a city to destroy.
Oh, if you'll excuse me, I'll just have another of those delicious sandwiches. I'm as hungry as a hunter.
So, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. I have to clean dead flies out of the lighting fixtures.
If you'll excuse me, I'll be in a canteen if you want me.
If you'll excuse me.
If you'll excuse me, I must get back to my galaxy now.
If you'll excuse me, I'd like Mick to say hello to Senator Manley.
That's a good idea.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
If you'll excuse me.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another appointment.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I got business to attend to.
If you'll excuse me.
If you'll excuse me, I'll go to bed.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I have some fences to mend.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to the gym.
Well, if you'll excuse me, we're approaching my
Oh,
station.
no, just wait a moment. Wait a moment. Now, if you'll excuse me.
If you'll excuse me, I'll see what's keeping Mama. Mama is so eager to see you.
If you'll excuse me, this one's a little out of sorts. I'll be right back.
I am on duty, so if you'll excuse me.
Of course.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll see that my guests are happy.
If you'll excuse me, my mother's waiting up for me with a hot toddy.
Get out of here. You never had a mouth. Sit down.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm dead.
What's it like?
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Yes, of course.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some unfinished business to take care of.
Well then, gentlemen, if you'll excuse me.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy.
Listen, Ivy.
If you'll excuse me.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Now, if you excuse me, I'm going to go home and have a heart attack.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Well, if you'll excuse me. All right. Both.
If you'll excuse me, it appears I have a previous engagement.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 5 people's work to do.
Well, excuse me, I've got to be going.
Why?
Now, if you'll excuse me, sir, I have a walk card to prime.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be in the gym.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I got a little workout in the backyard.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have speech to prepare.
Now, if you'll excuse me,
I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
Now, if you will excuse me, I have many matters to attend to. Oh, yes.
If you'll excuse me, I'll say good night.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
If you'll excuse me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to do.
If you'll excuse me, Your Majesty.
Huh.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I'll run and make the tea. The kettle must be nearly on the boil.
If you'll excuse me.
Of course, forgive me.
Well, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go on an overnight drunk, and in 10 days, I'm going to set out to find the shark that ate my friend and destroy it.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll get my things.
Now, if you'll excuse me. Tragically, I have a previous engagement.
If you'll excuse me, gentlemen.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to check the survey lines.
I've always wanted to check the survey lines.
And now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll retire.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I must be going. Fraser's on.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to hurl.
Okay, Garth. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tank to catch.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got an after-funeral party to attend. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I should. Peace! Wait a minute!
So, what do you see?
Bolivia's square.
NATO?
wax and wood.
Anything else?
It's heavy. Too heavy.